The Vietnam War was a long and costly conflict. It deeply divided the United States. The war raged in the jungles of Vietnam, but its impact was felt worldwide. From 1954 to 1975, the US fought alongside South Vietnam against Communist North Vietnam. This war became a defining moment of the Cold War era. The Vietnam War was about containing the spread of communism. However, it became a quagmire. The US struggled to achieve its objectives. The war had a profound impact on American society, fueling anti-war protests and leaving lasting scars. The Vietnam War remains a controversial topic. It raises questions about the use of military power and the limits of American intervention abroad. Understanding the Vietnam War is crucial to comprehending the complexities of the Cold War and its legacy. To understand the Vietnam War, we must go back to the Colonial era, a time when the seeds of conflict were first planted. For centuries, Vietnam was ruled by France as part of French Indochina, a vast colonial empire that included Laos and Cambodia. This colonial rule sowed the seeds of conflict and resentment that would later erupt into war. The Vietnamese people faced harsh labor conditions, heavy taxation, and cultural suppression under French rule. After World War II, Vietnamese nationalists, led by Ho Chi Minh, fought for independence. Inspired by the global wave of decolonization, they sought to break free from French control. Ho Chi Minh, a communist leader, sought to unify Vietnam under his rule. He envisioned a Vietnam free from foreign domination, where the people could determine their own destiny. The French, weakened after the war, were determined to hold on to their colony. They launched military campaigns to reassert their control, but faced fierce resistance from the Vietnamese. This clash led to the First Indochina War, a brutal conflict that lasted from 1946 to 1954. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the war devastated the Vietnamese countryside. In 1954, the French suffered a major defeat at Dien Bien Phu. This battle was a turning point, as the French forces were overwhelmed by the Vietnamese. This defeat marked the end of French colonial rule in Vietnam. The French were forced to negotiate a peace settlement and withdraw their troops. The country was temporarily divided along the 17th parallel, with the North and South governed separately until elections could be held. Ho Chi Minh's communist forces controlled North Vietnam, while a US-supported government took hold in the South. This division created a tense and volatile situation. This division set the stage for the Second Indochina War, which would become known as the Vietnam War. The conflict would escalate, drawing in major world powers and leading to a prolonged and devastating war. The United States, driven by the domino theory, feared the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. This fear led to increased US involvement in Vietnam. The domino theory posited that if one country fell to communism, others in the region would follow. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin Incident occurred. This incident involved alleged attacks on US Navy destroyers by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The incident, whether real or fabricated, provided the pretext for the US Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This resolution authorized President Lyndon B. Johnson to escalate US military involvement in Vietnam. With the resolution in place, the US began sending combat troops to Vietnam in large numbers. The US military presence grew rapidly, reaching over 500,000 troops by the late 1960s. The US became deeply embroiled in the Vietnam War, a conflict that would test its military might and its resolve. As the war escalated, so too did opposition to it. The Vietnam War deeply divided American society. Anti-war protests erupted across the country, fueled by growing casualties, the draft, and televised images of the war's brutality. The anti-war movement gained momentum throughout the 1960s. College campuses became hotbeds of protest. Students organized demonstrations, teach-ins, and draft card burnings. The movement drew support from civil rights activists, intellectuals, and artists. The Vietnam War also had significant international implications. The conflict fueled Cold War tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, which supported North Vietnam. The war also had a destabilizing effect on Southeast Asia, leading to political upheaval and humanitarian crises in neighboring countries. Section 5. The Tet Offensive, a turning point. In January 1968, during the Vietnamese New Year holiday of Tet, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched a massive surprise offensive. The Tet Offensive, though militarily a failure for the Communists, proved to be a turning point in the war. The offensive targeted major cities and military installations throughout South Vietnam. The attacks shocked the American public, which had been led to believe that the U.S. was winning the war. The Tet Offensive exposed the credibility gap between the Johnson administration's optimistic assessments of the war and the reality on the ground. The Tet Offensive had a profound impact on American public opinion. Support for the war plummeted, and the anti-war movement gained even more traction. The offensive marked a turning point in the war, shifting public sentiment decisively against U.S. involvement. Section 6. A slow retreat from Vietnam. Following the Tet Offensive, the United States began a gradual withdrawal from Vietnam. President Richard Nixon, who had taken office in 1969, implemented a policy of Vietnamization. This policy aimed to gradually hand over responsibility for the fighting to the South Vietnamese while reducing the U.S. military presence. The U.S. continued to provide military and financial support to South Vietnam. However, the withdrawal of U.S. troops demoralized the South Vietnamese army and emboldened the North Vietnamese. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in 1973, officially ended U.S. combat involvement in Vietnam. Despite the peace accords, fighting continued between North and South Vietnam. The U.S. withdrawal left a power vacuum that the North Vietnamese were quick to exploit. The South Vietnamese government, weakened by corruption and internal divisions, proved unable to resist the North Vietnamese onslaught. Section 7. The Fall of Saigon and the End of an Era. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon, marking the fall of South Vietnam. This moment was not just a military victory but a symbolic end to a conflict that had divided families, communities, and nations for decades. The event was a dramatic conclusion to the long and bloody conflict. Streets that had once been bustling with life were now scenes of chaos and fighting, a stark reminder of the war's brutal reality. The fall of Saigon signaled the end of the Vietnam War and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. For many, it was a moment of celebration, but for others, it marked the beginning of a new struggle. The fall of Saigon had a profound impact on the United States and its allies. The images of American soldiers leaving Vietnam and the chaotic evacuation of the U.S. Embassy became iconic symbols of a failed intervention. It raised questions about American credibility and its role as a global superpower. Debates raged in the halls of Congress and in the media as the nation grappled with the implications of its foreign policy. The war's end also led to a reassessment of U.S. foreign policy and a reluctance to engage in protracted military interventions abroad. The American public, weary from years of conflict, demanded a new approach. The fall of Saigon also had a devastating impact on Vietnam. The immediate aftermath saw a mass exodus of refugees desperate to escape the new regime. The country faced years of economic hardship, political repression, and social upheaval. The scars of war were visible everywhere, from the poverty-stricken streets to the political rallies calling for change. Millions of people were displaced, and countless others suffered the physical and psychological scars of war. The legacy of the Vietnam War would continue to shape the lives of those who lived through it and the generations that followed. Section 8. The Vietnam War's Legacy. The Vietnam War left an indelible mark on both Vietnam and the United States, shaping the destinies of both nations in profound ways. The war's legacy continues to shape the two countries to this day, influencing their politics, societies, and cultures. In Vietnam, the war's impact is visible in the physical and psychological scars it left behind. The landscape bears the marks of conflict, and the people carry the memories of loss and resilience. The country is still grappling with the war's aftermath, from unexploded ordnance that poses daily dangers to Agent Orange contamination that has caused long-term health issues for generations. In the United States, the Vietnam War had a profound impact on American society, politics, and culture. It was a time of great upheaval and change, as the war divided the nation and sparked widespread protests. The war led to a loss of innocence and a deep mistrust of the government, as many Americans questioned the reasons for the conflict and the honesty of their leaders. It also fueled anti-war sentiment and sparked a national debate about the use of military power, the role of the United States in the world, and the ethical implications of war. The Vietnam War also had a lasting impact on American culture. It influenced music, literature, and film, as artists sought to make sense of the conflict and its aftermath. The war inspired countless books, films, and songs, many of which explored the war's complexities and its impact on those who fought in it. These works continue to resonate with audiences today, offering insights into the human experience of war. The war also led to a greater awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and the challenges faced by veterans returning from combat. This awareness has spurred efforts to provide better support and care for those who have served. Section 9. Conclusion, Lessons Learned, Lessons Remembered. The Vietnam War was a complex and tragic conflict. It was a war that deeply divided the United States and left an indelible mark on both Vietnam and the world. The war's legacy continues to shape our understanding of conflict, intervention, and the limits of American power. The Vietnam War teaches us the importance of understanding the history and culture of other nations. It reminds us of the human cost of war and the need to pursue peace through diplomacy and understanding. The war also highlights the importance of a well-informed public and the need to question authority. The Vietnam War was a tragedy for all involved. It is a war that we must remember, not to glorify it, but to learn from its mistakes and to strive for a more peaceful future. The lessons of the Vietnam War are as relevant today as they were decades ago.